Good afternoon, and welcome to the Middle East Forum's webinar and podcast series, featuring talks from Middle East Forum's projects. My name is Dexter Van Zyl, and I am the managing editor of Focus on Western Islamism, and I'm going to be moderating today's discussion. And today's guest is our investigative reporter, Susannah Johnston, who attended the Islamist-organized anti-Israel rally that took place in Washington, D.C. this past, Saturday, the 100th day after the October 7th massacre. You can see her photo and the coverage of her attendance at this rally at islamism.news. Before we begin, I would like to remind our listeners that they can submit questions at the bottom of the screen and by posting them in the Q&A section. So good afternoon, Susannah. I just want to get a sense, who organized this event?
So it's really your old guard Muslim Brotherhood affiliated groups, and a couple of South Asian Jamaat-e-Islami groups are thrown in there too. So CARE, AMP, Muslim American Society, SJP is part of AMP, those groups. So nothing new here. And these organizations have been hosting similar rallies for the past, since October 7th in
Right.
DC.
Now, so how many people were at this rally? I mean, how big was it? Was it just sparsely attended, or was there a lot of people?
It was massive. There were, I can't officially estimate. We do know that they have been given to exaggerating, but they estimated 300 to 400,000. I have been to a few football games, and I would not be surprised if there were at least 100, 200,000, maybe more, but it was a lot. Just for a span of, crowd spans, they held their main rally in Freedom Plaza, which is right in front of, if you've ever been down to, it's like basically you've got the White House property cornering, and then you've got this little section. It's a plaza right in the middle of the street, and then you've got hotels on either side of the street. So you've got the Waldorf Astoria on one side, and a couple of other really nice hotels on the other side. That entire area was packed with people. I crossed the street in there and just like elbowed my way all the way through the crowd. So it was a lot of people.
Now, what was their overall messaging?
And so that part was really, really interesting because, post October 7th, you have some of these groups coming out, really showing their hand. We've been tracking them for years, but they're really showing their hand really in very open support of Hamas, like Nihad Awad with CARE, executive director. He said some very blatantly pro-Hamas things, like he was happy about it. But at this rally, they were very toned down with what they were in favor of. Their main message was, we are super angry with Joe Biden. He better listen to us, or we're not going to vote for him. And they had this, little line. So Umar Suleiman, one of the speakers, got up and he said, we charge you with genocide. And Joe Biden, we charge you with genocide. And he led the crowd in ranting that.
Now,
and then a couple other things. I mean, I would say that was their primary message. But then they also threw in, basically we're backing Yemen. We're in favor of the Houthis. They didn't say Houthis, but there's not a lot of other directions you can go with that. And then there were, a little bit of mention of South Africa. But the gist, their main point was, we're mad at Joe Biden.
Okay. Now, you've worked in Congress. Are politicians going to take that crowd size and the messaging seriously, do you think? Is this the type of thing that will actually have an impact on how the politicians behave, do you think?
They were flying a lot of Yemeni flags in that crowd. And if they wanted to be taken seriously, they shouldn't have been doing that. This is a tangent. I don't want to get too much into that, but the Houthis have been attacking. They've been, there's just been these like little skirmishes over the last 2 months, but it's disrupting international trade. And so one thing that they're tossing in, I think that this organized crowd, the speakers, they wanted to say, hey, this is all about Hamas. It is definitely about Hamas, but it's not just about Hamas. It's like when you start pulling in the Houthis, what are you doing with Iran? And this becomes a much bigger Middle Eastern problem. And I think that if they had just purely painted themselves as victims, which I think was their attempt with this rally, is like, hey, this, there just needs to be a ceasefire. This is a genocide, what's happening in Gaza. That's all this is. But then they were flying all these Yemeni flags, which I think complicates, it's going to make it a lot harder for them to be taken seriously.
Okay, now you mentioned a little bit about what the speeches were like. Can you go in a little bit more detail about what you heard?
I mean that is pretty much all they said, and I think that that was one strange thing about it was that so it's like Omar Suleiman, who I actually missed his speech. I think he spoke before I got there, but I went back and reviewed his speech that was posted all over the internet, and he literally said, "Joe Biden, we charge you." He said, "Joseph Robinette Jr., we charge you with genocide," and then he led the crowd in a chant, and then demand ceasefire, demand ceasefire. And then that is pretty much what all the other speakers said, some kind of variation of that. So it was a very tightly scripted message. They weren't really deviating from that message, which was very interesting because in the last few months, they have not been so careful with their messaging, but I would say they were very careful.
Now, what was the signage and the placards like? Were they kind of repeating what was said from the podium, do you think?
Yeah, absolutely. And that was another thing that was super interesting. And I mean, really, even in reviewing, just thinking back and also reviewing all of the pictures that I took of the crowd. I mean, of course, being there all day, you had a bunch of signs, homemade signs that said Genocide Joe. And you had flags that say ceasefire now. There were a bunch of, there was a lot of socialist, Marxist influence, a bunch of the endorsing organizations of this, this group that put together the whole thing, were our socialist Marxist groups. So there was definitely, you could see that flare in the crowd. It wasn't just Palestinian flags. You had a bunch of Palestinian flags, a bunch of Yemeni flags. And yeah, the messaging, that part was really fascinating, is that the flags and the signs in the crowd matched exactly what was being said from the podium, without deviation, which that's remarkably own message. Let's just say that.
Okay, now this isn't the first rally that you attended. What was it like compared to the one that you went to in October? What was the one in October? How did they differ?
So I went to the October rally that I went to was right after the Hamas attack on Israel on October 7th. I can't remember whether it was the following weekend or the weekend after, but this one was it was right next to the White House. And the crowd at that one was livid. I mean, it was honestly really disturbing. The level of anger, it was just, you could feel the anger and you're like, okay, I'm glad that they don't know who I am. This could be very dangerous. But this crowd this past Saturday was really calm. I mean, there were elements that, I think very much identify where they stand ideologically, like their Yemeni flags, of course, the Palestinian flags. And then here and there you have other elements. It's like there were a few Lebanese flags, but there were country flags. It's like we're not seeing the flag of Hezbollah. We're not actually seeing Hamas flags. There was a guy wearing a headband that had the Shahada on it. And I mean, it matches what Hamas wears, but it didn't have any Hamas insignia on it. So, but I mean, it's just more like, well, because you're at this rally that's associated with these people, I mean, it's pretty clear association, but it was a lot cleaner. At that rally in October, it was a lot more vitriolic.
Okay. Now, one of the things that so this crowd you mentioned, and maybe you've already mentioned it, but there was women with baby carriages. It was almost like a family event for some of these people.
Yeah, tons of families. In fact, several kids got lost. And so then they would just interrupt the program and say, hey, this little boy got lost. He's wearing this jacket. And then they'd call out his name and say, hey, if you're out there somewhere, please come up to the podium. So it was a lot of families. And at the same time, you have guys climbing on top of everything. So I think that that's something that I think we should highlight. Is like, sure, it's a family crowd, but what are these families okay with? They're defacing public property. That's what they were doing over at the White House. They're writing just horribly obscene things that shouldn't be written about any president, regardless of whether you disagree with them or not. And then families are rolling their kids around in strollers over there. And then there were these guys. I did post a picture of this. I think you can see it. It's the one where the guys are they're standing on top of a bus stop shelter. And at one point, they were leading the crowd in Allahu Akbar. They were yelling that, Allahu Akbar. And then you can see, like, if you look at the picture, I don't know if you can zoom in from the news article that we posted, but if you zoom in that picture, you can see that the sweatshirt of one of the guys who is standing up there says, "No peace on stolen land." So, I mean, that's pretty hard to say, like, okay, which land are you talking about is stolen here? Because that's deeply anti-Semitic, and very disturbing. And then you accompany that with his bro up there who's yelling Allahu Akbar. That's
Right.
not pro-America, not pro-Israel right there.
Now, one of the questions that I have is, and this is it's going to answer it itself. Was there any expression of like remorse or condemnation of the terrible violence that took place on October 7th? Did anyone come forward and say that murdering people and raping and butchering and kidnapping is not appropriate?
No, no, not at all.
Okay, so was it almost like it? So that basically has been driven from people's minds in this crowd, or it wasn't never
No,
part of it?
I think you're absolutely right. It's like, oh, let's pretend what we're supporting here. Let's pretend, let's kind of trick you into making everyone think that we are somehow the victims. Again, I think that one of your biggest tells there, not just the Palestinian flag, but the Yemeni flag. I mean, it's like they're supporting Houthi rebels here, and their slogan, the Houthi rebel slogan, is Allahu Akbar, death to America, death to Jews, a curse on the Jews, may Islam have the victory.
Now, this is
And
one of the reasons. Oh, keep going, keep
no,
going.
no, no, go ahead. Go ahead.
Okay, now this is one of the reasons why I find the participation of the far left is so interesting, is because essentially it seems as if they are used as cover to portray this violently, frank, for lack of a better word, genocidal, demopathic movement as a liberationist movement. Because the leftists, when they come in, did they portray this as more of a, like, some act of liberation, even while they were standing alongside people who were calling for the destruction of Israel or the West?
I think they're just not reading. They don't know what they're doing. I mean, they're walking around. I mean, I think it's kind of an anti-war thing, and I think that my guess is that they thought that being involved in this means no more death to anyone or something, except that that's obviously not true if you peel back just a tiny bit. So
Right.
a handful, I mean, a bunch of people who are angry at Joe Biden.
Okay. Now, one of the questions that we have, I'm going to open it up to questions, and I want to remind people that they can plug their questions into the Q&A down at the bottom of their Zoom screen. One of the things that one of the commenters said is that he only saw coverage on Fox News and New York Daily News, but not the Washington Post. What's your assessment? Did you see a lot of news coverage, and was it appropriate? Do you think that the amount and also just the angle that they took?
So I did not look for a lot of news coverage, honestly, afterwards. I mean, I was really trying to edit and go through my own stuff. I did see some of it, but they certainly had a lot of press there. There was a ton of press there. They had a press booth, and there was tons of press walking around in the crowd. So I don't know, and I was not keeping track of who was there. And so what I don't know happened is, like, did they all go down there and they went back to their bosses with all the footage and all the photos, and their bosses were like, "Hey, does not present the story that we want to present, and so we're not going to talk about it." I don't know.
Right. All right.
It
Now,
certainly was not favorable for the Biden administration at all. But it also could split Muslims with the Biden administration. Broadly speaking, not, Islamists, Muslims. I don't know why it was not more widely covered.
now, what was the demographic breakup? There's a question by Eric Seklov. Were there a lot of non-Arabs there, such as African Americans? I mean, and I know it's tough, but and also, what percentage of the crowd do you think was Muslim? Was it mostly leftist? Was it mostly, people from Muslim majority backgrounds? What do you think?
off the top of my head, I would say it was at least two-thirds Muslim, and then a third, maybe a third, white and black.
Okay.
Not really. In fact, I think they're honestly, like, off the top of my head, I kind of think there were more angry white liberals there than there were African Americans. But I'm
Okay.
not, I mean, I wasn't actually counting. That's just the sense that I
Right.
got.
Now, and I don't want to. One of the things there is a question from a Nancy Epp that says is that look, the FBI went after the the event, the people who were responsible for the events of January 6, 2020. Do you think that the FBI has leave to or any interest in basically going after the people who made like aggressively went after the White House, uh, or do you think that that's just going to be left alone?
I would expect it to be left alone, but I'm not inside the FBI, so it's hard to know.
Right. Now, but there wasn't
And
any.
well, they would not be identifying themselves though.
Okay. All
So
right. So, all right.
if there were people there, you wouldn't know.
Right. Okay. Now, I guess one of the things, there's another question. There was a question about what cities actually bust people in to participate. And for that, I can actually answer a little bit of that. I was in an event on Saturday night at the Islamic Society of Boston, covering an event that was a fundraiser for another mosque in Boston called the Praise Allah Mosque. And Siraj Wahaj mentioned in passing that he sent a busload of, or that there was essentially a bus from New York City, and I know that there were buses from Boston. Do you know how many any other cities or any sense with of how many people were bussed in to participate in this event?
I think it was mostly people from out of town. I actually did a rough estimate before. You couldn't tell how many different buses were coming in, but there were at least 80 different bus locations across the US, mostly East Coast. And then I think Chicago was sending people. And so it looked like they had plans to bus in at least 5,000. But I think it was far more than that, given how many people were there. I'm sure that some people were local. Of course, it's like Maryland, New Jersey. That's not very far away. Uh, Individual families definitely drove themselves there. I mean, all the parking decks, you could walk on the parking deck and see people who'd gone to the rally jumping in their cars. So the percentage of people who had ridden a bus versus people who had driven themselves there, I don't know what that breakdown is. DC police probably has an idea. I did talk to some security. I mean, even about what happened at the White House later on, how ugly did it get? And it's just a little vague.
Okay. Now, how did the bystanders, or the people who were not involved in the rally, did you get any sense of how people were responding to this?
What do you mean by people not involved in the rally? Because I don't know of
Well,
anyone who was down there who wasn't involved.
okay. Well, one of the things that we have seen at some of these other rallies on bridges, say in New York City or in highways, that people are starting to get tired of essentially they're being interrupted, of not being able to get to work on time or take their kids to the hospital, so to speak. So, but essentially there wasn't any like non-protesters by. There wasn't any tourists or anybody that just walked by to see what was going on.
No, I mean, I think that's the thing. I mean, I think that Washington, D.C. is a little bit unique to that. We have massive rallies, protests all the time. So it's not something that the city's not used to. It's not something that DC police they're used to it. In fact, that's another interesting thing is that the police on Saturday, I was surprised at that thing in October that I went to the rally where the organizers did not have control of the crowd. The police were nervous, and you could tell. Saturday, no. I mean, they were very well prepared. They had the entire route blocked off with vehicles, with security. And if you weren't part of it, you weren't there. Or you were taking pictures. So, I mean, there were tons of people in the crowd taking pictures, tons and tons of press. And so, just your everyday Joe wasn't out there.
All right. All right. The sense that I'm getting from your description of the difference between the two rallies and is that essentially it seems as if the Islamist leadership here in the United States has figured out a way to package the rage and the unhappiness and the anger over the October 7th war, so to speak, to actually and maintain it as a political asset, and basically use it to demonstrate to the Democratic Party that they're not going to be okay with them continuing to support Israel. What do you,
I
do you
think that's the
think that?
thing. See, I think that's the thing where, I mean, they had a Green Party candidate, Jill Stein, speak at their rally. She's running for president. So I think at this point they are so mad at the Biden administration that they don't really care. Now, how deeply they don't care is I think that it's kind of both. I mean, I think that they're done, and then at the same time, I think to an extent they realize it's their only option because the whole thing was an anti-Biden rally, except that they are so politically entrenched in supporting Hamas and supporting Houthis. I mean, it's just like ideologically incompatible.
Now, did you see any people from the LGBTQ plus or trans folks at the event, or was this mostly just Islamists and far leftists?
Uh, really Islamist and far leftist.
Okay,
There might have been, I would have to go back through my pictures. There might have been one flag, but it was definitely not, an LGBTQ presence of
okay.
significance.
Now here's a question from Daniel Pipes. Do you think that the organizers are pleased with the event or they're disappointed? What's your take? If you were in their inner sanctum, what would your assessment be?
I think they were very pleased. And from that standpoint, that's a little disturbing.
What?
But from the sense that I don't think that they are taking a winning. I mean, they don't have a winning strategy here. I don't. But I think that they were happy. But I think that they made a big mistake in flying Yemeni flags.
Now,
I think that they could have tricked people in Congress who might have otherwise listened to them, or even pressured the president. But dumb move right there. That's my take.
right. Now, did you have any direct interaction with any of the speakers, or did you just kind of keep your distance and videotape and take photos?
I was really far away from the speakers. I couldn't, I mean, I got videotape of them. I was close enough to get video, but I wasn't close enough to talk to any of them.
All right, but how about the people in the crowd?
People in the crowd were very friendly to me. I mean, I wasn't wearing any kind of identification. That might have changed things, but I mean, again, a lot of families. There were these kids that climbed up on top of a satellite truck, and then the organizers of the whole thing were yelling for them to get down. And the crowd was nice, as problematic as the agenda is that they're pushing for.
Right. Now, what was the mix of languages? Did you hear a lot of Arabic spoken, or was it mostly just English?
English, a little bit of Arabic from the stage, but English.
Yeah. Now, so all right. Now, do you think one of the reasons why the event was held was just to demonstrate how much political force they could muster? And
Yes,
that
yes,
okay.
I think
And
absolutely.
yeah. And all right. So I think and I'm going to look one last time to see if there are any other questions. All right. Now, was the White House fence damaged? The Fox News story said that the White House staff was moved because of the protest. Uh, did you when you were there? Did you really see? Did you get a sense that they were actually going to try and storm the White House?
Not while I was there, but I did talk to security after I left. So I was only down there till about 6:30. But 6:30 in January, it was completely dark. I mean, it could have been midnight, in terms of how it felt out there. But crowd, they were shooting off smoke bombs, waving flags. They were shaking the White House fence. The White House had put up an extra security fence. And the video that I took, you can see them shaking the security fence. And I mean, I went back and looked at the video. I was like, man, that looks so creepy. Now, being down there, it actually didn't feel like they were going to do anything. And some of that's because you have all these like families, like literally right there, pushing their kids in strollers, milling around. People are saying, "Oh, I'm sorry, excuse me," um, and then some people are down there, just a few feet away, shaking the fence. I did see when I walked out across right there, that's Lafayette Square, that park right there next to the White House. And then you walk, so you have a street and then that park, and then you have the White House. And so if you cross that park, there I saw a line of police walk in right as I was leaving. And I admit I was tempted to turn around and follow them. Now I didn't, which is probably good. But the police that were walking in they were not riot police. They just had, helmets, little masks, but they were not carrying shields. They didn't have batons. They didn't have other stuff with them. And those guys go in before the riot police go in. Now, did the riot police get called in later? I don't know. I have not followed up to see if they did. But that's when I would be, much more concerned. Was there a real threat? Were these guys just being obnoxious? Now, the people down there at the White House, they were, I did walk past a table where they had all this red paint in jugs. And I heard one protester say to another person, "Hey, that's for later, cover it up." I got a picture. Unfortunately, it's not a great picture. I mean, I can tell what it is. And, anyone could tell what it is, but it's not, really nice resolution with lighting and everything. So I didn't post that one. But they had stuff there to deface public property, and they were in the process of defacing public property while I was down there with all these families walking around.
Here's a scenario, and this is going to be one of the last questions. What would have happened if it were necessary for the police to use tear gas or to use crowd control techniques with the families present? I mean, do you think that there might have been a certain cynical hope that was going to happen?
Maybe. Who knows? I mean, I get where you're going with that, but I don't know. I mean, you could just have naive people down there that are fine with a certain level of public disorder, have different moral standards for what it's okay to do in public and not, and how you deal with property that doesn't belong to you. Which that was the part that was striking to me. It's like anyone, I was just thinking that any parent, you'd be like, "Hey, this is not our crowd. We're gonna leave." But that's not what was there.
Okay. Now, did you disguise yourself? Did you dress like a Muslim woman?
No.
Okay, that was one of the questions. And now this is a tough question to answer, and it may not be answerable, but are any of the speakers identifiable as non-citizens or visitor or resident status could be challenged for if they engaged in incitement?
No. Well, the speakers. I
Or
believe all
even,
the speakers. No, I believe all the speakers were. I mean, were actually some of them were actually born here.
okay, all right. Well, I think we've come to the end of our webinar. I want to thank everyone, and I want to thank you, Susannah, for participating. And I want to ask everyone to be on the lookout for next week's webinar offerings, which will be emailed to you over the weekend. Thanks, everyone, for being here, and we'll see you next week. Thank you.